Well, good afternoon, folks. We are back for part two of our Iwo Jima week, and the first of two shows this evening. Joining me first, and I'll introduce him in a second, is Harlan Glenn, an old friend of mine, and we're going to talk about the terrain of the island and what you can find there, and the caves and the tunnels and the sand and the bitey things and the crawly things and the stabby things. And then later on, we have Brian Mark Rigg talking about some of the fighting and some of the Marines who were decorated and what have you. And Ian W. Toll, of course, last night talked about where Iwo Jima sits in the context of World War II in the Pacific campaign. So over the course of these several films, you will build up, hopefully, a good idea of what happened there at Iwo Jima 75 years ago today. Let's not forget, this is an anniversary week. All these events we're talking about were happening 75 years ago. So to join me, Harlan Glenn, who is a writer, works in the film industry, costumes. I've known you for what, about 20, 25 years-ish, something like that?
Like mid-90s, right?
Yeah, a long time.
Survivors of War and Peace show at Beltran.
The survivors of the beer tent and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so the thing is, Harlan, there's two types of people who've been to Iwo Jima, and basically not many have been to it at all. The two types are the people who go on the organized tours where you get off a plane and you're part of their anniversary, and it's sort of carpets and podiums and speeches and flags and this, that, and the other. And that's all very wonderful. And those people who've been able to do that, fantastic. That's great. I'd like to do that myself. Then there's a second category of people, of which you are one, who've actually crawled over the island, through the tunnels, through the sand, and that's the difference between that type of visit and the more organized one. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the island, how did you first start getting to go there, and what's your own personal connection with the battle?
Well, really, I think coming 2002, realizing that there's very little, sort of history about, the Marine Corps, World War II in the Pacific, and not having really a good working knowledge and wanting to learn more. And what better way to learn more about what the individual Marines experienced was to follow in their footsteps, to go to those islands, to take the same paths or routes that they had taken, from the beach inland, into the caves, into the tunnels, into the bunkers, to re-experience it, to see what it's like. Then when you're, of course, doing your own research, you're reading the books written by the veterans, it all comes alive in your head. You can, oh yes, I've been there. I can see it. I've walked across the razor sharp coral of Peleliu. We've been in the tunnels on Iwo. And then, of course, you're better able to have a conversation with veterans. Having been there, you can talk about specific places that they were at during the battle, like, oh yes, the Bloody Gorge on Iwo, or Cushman's Pocket. It just really helps to reinforce that experience of relearning or learning more about the history. And for a battlefield historian, I mean, I grew up with my grandfather during the latter part of the American Civil War centennial. Any given school holiday, we would go to a battlefield and we would walk the ground. We would talk about the units and the men that fought in those places. We'd then go to the museum and see whatever they had on exhibit. Occasionally, we would go into the archives if we could get in, to then study whatever they didn't have on display, because we had this thirst for knowledge, wanting to know more about these men, like my great grandfather who was in that war. I have his diary, so we would go back and follow his routes so we could learn more about what he might have seen or experienced. Fast forward to World War II. At the time, was working on a series called Suicide Missions for History Channel. And we had a Marine Raider episode. In the course of making that 1-hour episode, we interviewed a number of World War II Marine Raiders, and what amazing individuals they were. I fell in love with them and, befriended them, wanted to, hear more about their experiences in, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Raider battalions. That's what started it all. So I began to get any book I could on, Marine Raiders, or either the early Pacific campaigns, Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, etc. And then wow, I didn't realize that you can go back there. There were tour groups that would take you to and from. Great. So come around 2002, a buddy of mine and I signed up. We're going to hit Saipan, we're going to hit Tinian, we're going to hit Iwo, and we're going to hit Peleliu. So it's going to be like a 14-day packed, battlefield exploration. We knew going in that as soon as we hit the ground, we were going to say goodbye to the tour group, to the tour bus, and we're going to go, stomp some boonies. And we figured out, okay, when we get to Iwo, we're going to follow the route of the 28th Marines up from Green Beach, and then to up Suribachi, or we're going to follow 23rd Marines from Yellow Beach to through the meat grinder in the East Boat Basin. We always had a mapped out plan. When we hit the ground, we know exactly what we're going to do, and we do it. And whatever we find along the way, artifacts wise, or whatever positions, pillboxes, bunkers, we'll stop. We'll take pictures, study it, and then move on. That's how it all started. Like that first trip, 2002, was enlightening. A lot of the places that we went back to, I'm talking very fast because I've just had, I think 2 shots of espresso in my chai latte.
It's all good for you. Yeah, it's
yes. It's like my friends will say, "Don't ever give Harlan coffee." Well, it's too late. I'm sorry, Paul. Anyway, back to subject.
And this, folks, is because we're an old friend, and it's going to descend into banter,
we won't. I promise. Scouts on.
But just to interject here, we were talking before we went live about just, for me as a European, even you as an American, Iwo Jima is as close as we have on our planet to a foreign planet. It's that, land that time forgot. Talk about, for the viewers, that when you're flying in there, what you just said to me before we went live.
Well, right, yeah. It's Iwo is very unique of all the Pacific battlefields because it's so remote. Let's say besides, Koror and Peleliu, Iwo is probably as remote as you can get. You typically, like the tour groups, will go to the island of Guam, and then there's a 3.5-hour flight from Guam to Iwo. If you come from Okinawa, then you're going to see the land that time forgot, because you're flying over, these live, molten pools that are coming up through the ocean. I've never seen anything like it. It was like, holy shit! It's like there's a live volcano still down below the ocean there as we're flying through the Bonin Islands, which you surround Iwo. And then when you, of course, coming up to the island, it's like, oh my gosh, that's it. There's Suribachi, it all comes to life before your eyes. It's really very unique in that not only, yes, it's a volcanic island, but the fact that it's so overgrown now, there's actually like a jungle-like, there's like a jungle on the island when you like,
because we're going to be using in a minute. We're going to start right. Because you were there in 2009 for an episode of Battle Rats, the show you hosted, which was one of the most successful shows on Military Channel kind of ever had. And you were saying there, when we'll show some of the photos in a minute, that the US seeded, like I dropped seeds on Iwo Jima after war to kind of like compensate for having turned it into a quarry,
some plant life, and it just took off like in a sci-fi sort of way, to where now there's areas on the island that you really can't navigate through because they're so overgrown. Gone is like the flat black terrain of, like, when you look at pictures of the battle and you see Motoyama #1 and #2, all of that flat land from north of Suribachi, which is like a no man's land. Now that's all overgrown, and more so when you get up to the northern part of the island, East Boat Basin, Cushman's Pocket. It's wild, man. I mean, you have to be careful when going through those areas. The veterans can't, because it's too hazardous.
So let's talk about, let's talk about the sand. We'll go through it bit by bit. We'll kind of do it the sequence that the things are covered in the Battle Rats. And, So you're there on the beach. Let's talk about the sand first, because I'm from Normandy, where Omaha Beach, when it's low tide, the beach is like compacted. It's like concrete. You can drive vehicles across it. It's a stable environment. The Iwo Jima sand is just completely different. So explain what that's like.
Yeah. So, well, really, the fact that it's coarse volcanic ash, and because it's so finite and coarse, it's not compacted. So, when the Marines are coming ashore, your feet are sinking into the ash, ankle deep, thigh deep. There's place like with the vehicles, when they finally brought them ashore, they had to lay down like the Marsden matting or the aluminum, the Marsden matting, the tracking that they used to improve the runways with, so the vehicles could get off the beach and inland, because the ground, the black ash is so coarse that they would just sink right up to their axles and they never get out. But as an infantryman, for all those men that came ashore, and right up until about the first tier of the beach, which is, then in places 75 yards, 100 yards, and you have a wide space of ground to cover just to get to the first tier, which is basically your first semblance of cover from all the guns that are firing, down both flanks and to the front of you. So that's basically where I'm standing now in the photograph, is what remains of the first tier. That's the farthest, most southern point of Green Beach, which is where the 28th Marines came ashore. Suribachi is then in the background, the base of Suribachi. That loose black ash, as I walked up it, my ankles were sinking into it. As you see here in the pictures of the Marines that are dug in, it was, they veterans have often said it was like digging in a grain bin. They would take their e-tool out and feverishly try to dig a hole to take cover in, but every time they took a scoop out, it would immediately fill in. So you've got to dig all that much faster to get any kind of a depression to take cover in. And even when we went my last trip, 2009, in the same area, there's just the beach is strewn with pieces of shrapnel from all the Japanese shells that were falling upon the beach, as well as spent 30-06 rounds from the Marines that were laying on the beach there, firing back. It was like 2002, still like a time capsule. Now, of course, with every visit, of veterans, their families, and servicemen and women, it's become less and less, because, of course, artifacts have been removed and whatnot, just like they have on any of the other islands. But here, standing like this, is about, you're still on like the border of Green Beach and Red Beach 1. That's all loose black ash, not really sand, but black ash. And as soon as they get down the ramp of their Higgins boat, or out the back of their LVT, you've really got a challenge to make it to any cover, because the ground is so soft. You just again, you go right up to your ankles.
And just to jump in, every time you see a photo, folks, with RZM Publishing in the corner, these are exclusive photos that are going to be in a book. And so Remy from RZM has kindly sent us these photos to use today. They are publishers of these wonderful glossy books. Douglas Nash works with them. Harlan works with them. These incredible archives of photos. So it's been wonderful to have some exclusive images. There are some, the ones that you've seen before, but these ones are kind of pretty new. So going back to this idea of this volcanic ash, you've spoken to Marine veterans. How much about this shit had they been told before they got there? We're talking normally about the lack of knowledge of the bocage. What were these guys briefed on? What were they told before they boarded those boats?
You had the 4th Marine Division on the island of Maui, what they called Camp Maui, and they would go up to, it was Mount Akila. I didn't pronounce that correctly, but the volcanic mountain on Maui, to train, to specifically train for Iwo. Good late friend of mine, Corpsman Danny Thomas, F Company, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines, said they were waiting for the rest of the 4th Marine Division to come back to Maui for Saipan, where they could collectively, as a regiment, as a division, prepare for their next operation, which was Iwo. So they're landing on the black ash beaches. They're assaulting the dormant volcanoes in preparation for. So at least they had that. So they kind of had an idea of, okay, this is not going to be like Peleliu. This is not going to be like Roy Namor or Kwajalein, which were like the flatter, the atoll islands. 5th Division, meanwhile, is over on the Big Island of Hawaii, again training on a similar black ash beach, and then assaulting pseudo enemy targets in preparation for Iwo.
So the volcanic ash is shitty. You can't dig in. Now that's you holding a bit of shrapnel in that photo there, and that's there with your team there, and and you're stressing that in the years since you started going there, things have changed a bit, and we can discuss later on in the show the long-term possibilities of visiting Iwo Jima, or in fact not visiting it, because well, it's come up now. Essentially, it's all the time there are veterans and veterans' families wanting to go back. It's unlikely to change. But the suggestion is the minute the last Iwo Jima veteran has died, the Japanese are kind of going to go, yep, no, that's it. You're finished. You're done. We don't know for certain, but that's what we kind of think, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, you could ask Patrick Mooney when he's on, is it tomorrow? Because he works.
Hopefully, I haven't heard back from him today, but
Military Historical Tours, who are the tour company that support all these veterans pilgrimages back to Iwo. But originally the idea was, the agreement, if you will, between the U.S. and Japan was that as long as there's an Iwo Jima veteran, American veteran alive, then we are thus allowed to return to the island on that one day a year to pay our respects. And that's it. One day, 7 to 8 hour day. When the last
apparently the last visits it was 5 hours. That Marty Morgan told me that where it used to be 8 hours, it's now 5 hours, and everything's become. But we're not here.
Yeah.
I mean, I opened up this rabbit hole.
That's all right. But like people, like you go to Gettysburg and you can take all the time you want. You go to Iwo and you're on a tight schedule, but for many reasons. I mean, over the years, it's gone from an 8 hour trip. And if you wanted to go out on your own with a partner, you never want to go on your own solo. The tour company were cool about it. Okay, great. If you go into a cave, be careful, make sure that people know where you're at. Oh, hey, I'm going to go behind Suribachi, back in 2 hours, because if you're not, they'll know to go looking for you. Because they're very dangerous, and et cetera, et cetera. But lately, the Japanese have been more stringent in what they allow the visiting Americans to do and not to do. I mean, there's been times when they've held everybody captive, if you will, at the hangar on the main runway until they could start, the ceremony. Now we'll shuttle everybody over to the ceremony, and that's going to take 2 or 3 hours. And from there, maybe we get up to Suribachi. Gratis, the Marine Humvees of the Marine Advance Party there to, facilitate that. And that's it. Maybe you get to Kuribayashi's headquarters cave, maybe you don't. But this is also due to months after our last trip, 2009, 2 Japanese self-defense force officers were exploring the tunnels. They're on their own, battlefield tour, if you will, because they teach that class, of course, to their troops. They pushed it too hard. They went into some of the lower levels underneath the runway. They succumbed to the toxic gases, and they basically went to sleep and never woke up. They died. Since then, apparently the island's commander lost his command. New commander comes in from Japan and says, all right, that's it. From now on, the tunnels are off limits to everybody because of the amount of, responsibility and danger for anybody, military or civilian. That was 2009, 2010. And if because most of the tunnels are loose sandstone, they are very dangerous. And if you really don't know what you're doing and you push it too hard, you can succumb to those. Some of the tunnels are so caked with sulfur, giant chunks the size of your hand. They do affect you to where, if you go too far, you push it too hard, you're gonna pass out. So anyway,
we'll get to the tunnels in a minute. While we're looking at this photo of you stopping at one of the pillboxes, and as you say in the episode of Battle Rat, it's a mixture of the indigenous rocks, and they've shoved stuff in it, and shells and rock and things. So the types of thing to see there, you've got the obviously Mount Suribachi is the dominating feature, and you've got the kind of flattish plains bit which are now overgrown, which wouldn't have been at the time, and you've got this incredible amount of defenses. And we talked with Ian Toll yesterday about the incredible depth of Japanese, 18 miles of tunnels, all these pillboxes and anti-tank guns and mortars and foxholes and machine guns, so that pretty much every inch of the island was covered with fire. So the bunkers that you visit now, what, as a battlefield historian, you say you've been to these battlefields around the world, and you have, what can you tell our viewers about these types of bunkers you're looking at now? What's unique about the Iwo Jima ones?
Well, to back up just a little bit, if I may, starting at Saipan, when now we have to fortify the island, you may not get all the materials from Japan or wherever, because those ships are being sunk with those materials on it, those building materials, and then you've got to figure it out with whatever available materials you have on the island. So then, like with Peleliu, the bunkers, the pillboxes they have, and the reinforced caves are basically a culmination of what supplies they had, and then what they had to work with on the island. This Type 92 heavy machine gun bunker embrasure that you see here, of course, as you see, it's made up from rock and cement that they mixed up there on the island. They did have, of course, for Iwo, they spent a year from 1944 and on until the invasion. The Marines came to visit. That they had almost a year to improve the island. So then they're coming in with military engineers who are improving upon the mining engineers' tunnels. Of course, they would mine Iwo for sulfur.
It had a tradition for being a resource for sulfur.
That was a vital ore mine, supply for, if you will. So from those tunnels, those military engineers then spent about a year reinforcing all the caves, bunkers, and then building up, emplacements like this. And it looks like they, cinder blocks, and then covered with cement and rocks. And then the earth the foliage is allowed to grow up on top of it, over it, to better camouflage it. That one was right at the base of Suribachi, right at the corner of Green Beach. Once you're inside that Type 92 bunker, it opens up right on the flank of Green Beach, and I'm sure they fired all the way down the flank of the landing beaches, and with a heavy machine gun. I mean, you can imagine, like with the Atlantic Wall, Oma, like, okay, you're not firing down the front, you're firing down the flank, and it's so well camouflaged, you're going to have a hard time figuring out where that fire was coming from. There are numerous bunkers like that all around the base of the mountain.
Yeah. And, when Ian said yesterday about the fact that by this point of the war, the US have, just thousands of aerial photos and sea level photos from the midget submarines, the whole lot there. But there's only so much you can glean from aerial photos in an environment where foliage grows quickly, where everything's camouflaged in. There's no substitute for actually walking up these things. And here you are actually ascending Mount Suribachi. And the point, when I had the idea of doing an Iwo Jima week, the one thing I didn't want to talk about all the time was just the flag raising and the flag raising, because there's that whole bit of getting from the beach to the top of Mount Suribachi. And as you can see there, it's a very steep slope, and
it's a steep climb. And we've done it. I've done it 3 times on 3 different trips. First time was not in shape, and if I may, kicked my ass. Second time, okay, it's coming. Let's work out and prepare. So then by the third time here that you see pictured, that was 2009. So now we're in pretty good shape, and we know what to expect. That any root that you grab on is going to come right out of the ground. So you've got to keep a perpetual motion up, to get to reach the top of the summit, or else you're going to keep sliding down in the loose ash and the rocks. They're very brittle, they're very dry, and as you make your way up, they come right apart. Here, like bracing myself on some of the the brush. A lot of those will pull right out of the ground once there's any weight on them. This particular time, prior to the trip, I had got with Colonel Severance. Well, Colonel Severance was at the time of the battle with E Company, 28th Marines, and together, I want to go back, and I want to try to follow as close as I can to the route that the 42-man patrol took. Great. So graciously, the colonel gave me some landmarks to look for. We then, on various phone calls, looked at, wartime pictures and present day pictures. Okay, well, so you see this rock outcropping here, so keep to the right of that. And so I feel like this time we actually took as close to the same route that the 42-man patrol took when they ascended Mount Suribachi to raise what became both flags. It was not an easy route, and I don't have a heavy haversack or a loaded rifle belt or a radio.
And you haven't been being shot at for hours as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
grenades rolled down on me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked in our prep about this, and it's just going to get that by this point in the war, Marines kind of as standard 2 canteens of water. Yes. But that's when you can have them replenished, and and you're talking about the temperatures out there, and you're burning all those calories, you're exerting yourself, you're getting sweaty. Just and that you work in the costume industry now. Costumes are midway, uniforms, whatever. Just talk about what happens to your HBTs, your herringbone twill overalls and gear there, and what the combination of the salt in the water and the grime, because I found that really revealing when we talked about that in our preamble.
Right. Well, yeah, you're basically your body and the uniform that you're wearing and your gear are essentially, heavily soiled and ripped to shreds. On Iwo too, the temperatures are very extreme. They'll go from one to the other. When the Sergeant Major Mastriano and I presented the flag in this picture, we're at the 5th Marine Division Monument atop Mount Suribachi. A typhoon had come the night before, and it just about washed away all the tunnels below ground. But it was cold. I mean, clearly you can see there that Sergeant Major Mastriano has his rain gear on, because it was cold. The wind was going, and if any of you that have lived on Okinawa know that no, it's not a tropical island at all. You're in the northern extreme Pacific, and once the wind gets going and the rain comes down, it's cold, man. This is why in a lot of the archival photos taken of the Marines during Iwo Jima, you'll see from one extreme to another. Here they've got their HBTs on. In other photos, they got their field jackets on over their HBTs because it's cool or it's cold.
It's not like the desert, isn't it? And then you sweat, and then the sweat gets cold, and then you get and it's
and
humans aren't good at massively fluctuating temperatures. We're better when it stays like something for a while.
But on Iwo, it doesn't. It'll change like that. The last trip, we were fortunate enough, we were with the Marine Advance Party, which meant that we were there for 3 days and 2 nights. And in that time period, the temperature was drastic. It went from like, okay, I'm a typhoon and I've come to the island, and it's like that scene from Wizard of Oz, where the house is spinning up and you're like, oh shit, where we go? Well, you can't go in the tunnels because they're all flooded and you'll wash away like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. So you've got to find some shelter till the very next day. Sun comes out and then it's blazing hot and you're sweating buckets. And you all the Marines by this time, they each have 2 canteens of water. But of course you've just got to use, good sense and ration that, because you don't know when you're going to be able to get resupply. On Iwo, there's of course there's no fresh water. They've got to bring it up to you either in an LVT or a daring a Jeep that could get through. But the fire was so murderous. They're like, you may not get it for a day or 2 or more. So you've got to like, okay, here's my canteen and canteens, and just pace yourself. And on days when it gets hot, it could be like on Iwo, we've experienced like 98 degrees. So that's pretty hot. Then when you go underground, it could be one or the other. It's like it's incredibly cold, or other places that it's closer to, like the heart of the old volcano. You'll be sweating. I mean, it's like being a minor 49er, back in the days in the bottom of the mine, and it's just coming down your face and your body. It's so hot. There's like, not to get into it right now, but in a place like Hill 362A, it's incredibly hot. The walls of the passageways were caked with sulfur, and we all have to. Even I'm only 5'7", the shortest one of the crew, but I had to lean forward to get through these tunnels. They were so hot. We had to take breaks and like, what? Let's get outside and get some fresh air, because it's just so stifling. Which of course,
this is exactly what we wanted to do in this show, because over the course of these shows, we're going to talk about the fighting, the big picture stuff yesterday, but today it's all about, with this show, it's all about just getting an idea of what the hell that terrain is. So I'm going to remind everybody that, of course, this week, Iwo Jima week, we do have a sponsor. So I'm going to just briefly play our sponsor's video, let Harlan have a break for 15 seconds, and we'll be right back talking about the tunnels. We're going down the tunnels next, folks.
All right.
Iwo Jima Week on WW2TV is sponsored by battlemaps.us. They produce high-quality reproductions of maps from the 13th century right up to the Second World War, including maps of Iwo Jima.
So that was a big thanks to Tim Sampson and the guys at Battle Maps US. So everybody wants to know about the tunnels. That's the thing that kind of separates Iwo Jima from other battles. This 18-kilometer underground complex that the Japanese built and then added to. And we must stress before we get into when you're going inside the tunnels that things have changed, because you were saying in our prep talk that at the time, of course, they're getting airflow, people are going in and out, and now with all the fall-ins since the war, it's a much more dangerous environment now than it was then. Of course, it had its dangers then, but way more now. So talk about that. Give us an idea of that first time. And I don't mean the touristy ones where you kind of just step in. I mean crawling in one of these bloody hellholes, what it was like there. Because you talk about it in battle rats, that the only light you had was the camera light in some cases. When there's
or the handheld flashlight, or if you wore, a headlamp. They're pitch black. It was full on like, Huck Finn goes into the cave and, you don't know what you're going to find. None of those tunnels have been charted since after the battle, when the Seabees actually sent in some combat artists who did, renderings and shot photographs of all the Japanese tunnel networks and bunkers in preparation for Okinawa and the invasion of mainland Japan. You can actually find copies of that. I got mine off of eBay one lucky day years back, It was, besides the enemy situation report, which is about 3 inches thick, there was actually booked defenses of Iwo Jima, which included like 8x10s of each bunker and or cave, network that was very different from the next, that they went into the tunnels and took pictures of, etc. But if you read any of the diaries from the Japanese soldiers that were there before and during the battle, they'll all say the same thing. It was stifling hot inside. And this is when they had, ventilation shafts, so fresh air could come into the tunnels. But some of these tunnels go back so far and so deep that, the fresh air is only going to go so far. So, you're down there. It's incredibly, it's like being a diver. And once you go down, too deep, you feel the effects of it. And that's what it was like for the Japanese soldiers inside, let alone to when the Marines hit the island. And then they began, blowing in, closing the ventilation shafts, closing entrances, closing exits. Now your fresh air sources are gone. Thus, today, when you go into these same tunnel networks, you'll see signs of, yep, there's a 50-gallon oil drum burst that a Marine demo guy must, strapped, some C2 or C4 to, blown, shut that entrance. And, okay, we got to go the other way. And there's very little fresh air at all.
So just to interrupt, we had the question from the Great Dominion about how the tunnels were excavated, because I think in this photo here, you're pointing out the pickaxe.
Right. Yeah. So starting with the miners who were there to mine the ore, it was done by hand. So they've got to, with a pickaxe, with shovels, to chisel away at these tunnels. This particular tunnel is inside of Mount Suribachi. So this is at the base of the isle, base of Mount Suribachi. It's carved out of, the hard lava rock, if you will. Most of the other tunnels on the island are not like this. So this is very unique to those that are actually under Mount Suribachi. And you can see like the groove marks. Those are all from pickaxes, striking the rock to chip away and to then form the tunnel, the passageway. You can imagine with all those strike marks, hundreds of engineers and workers, making these tunnels. That particular tunnel led into 5 different passageways, and then a final staircase, like right out of Nancy Drew, the 99 steps. That thing must have been about 150 steps at like a 40-degree angle in pitch black that led down to another. You're now, I don't know, 100, 120 feet below ground in the belly of Mount Suribachi. All those tunnels down there, unfortunately, had caved in, over time, as they will. Any of the side tunnels that led, we were able to go around, around Suribachi. I wanted to try to get completely around to the southern end just to see, to see what we could see. But you can only go so far because, eventually everyone will lead into a dead end. This one in particular, there's a crawl space to where, I had to get on my belly or my back and go through like a chute, if you will, maybe, 50, 60 feet. That's all loose sandstone inside. But, I knew I wanted to see what's inside. This is like, I finally found a way to get inside the mountain, and I'm gonna, throw my safety, to reckless abandon. Meanwhile, my cameraman was like, Harlan, this is loose sandstone that could cave in on you, and that'd be done, and you'd be done, and then we'd have to tell your kids, sorry, but your dad's, your dad
under a mountain. Yeah,
Mythical part of the mountain. So, but once we got inside this, so again, we all like, what, we're here, let's do it. throw caution to the wind. We want to see what's on the inside. This is maybe the only way we get inside Suribachi. Once inside, we encountered the magical spiders. They're about the size of your hand. We didn't bother them. They didn't bother us, thankfully. But we were now inside Suribachi, about, let's say, halfway up the mountain. So that would be about 350, 400 feet up. All those tunnels tended to be more loose sandstone than the hard rock like we found at the base. And in the things we found were like little hand-carved shelves to hold candles. There were still cables from the ceilings where they had, for electric lighting or communications equipment, personal items like the mess kit, rotten shoes. There was some, broken up, field phones and radios inside there, and just went on and on and on.
I'm going to interject a bit for a second because it's my show. And when we're talking, I don't know how many books there are written on Iwo Jima, but I would imagine there's like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of TV shows where they talk over the same old footage and what have you. And I know the people I'm having on this week. Brian later has been to Iwo Jima. You've been to Iwo Jima. To me, how could you possibly talk about the experiences of the Japanese and the Marines there without having crawled over and through this kind of stuff? Yes, you can glean a certain amount from the after action reports and speaking to veterans, but that's the difference. As people like James Holland and the others say that you've got to see battlefields for yourself to be able to explain it to someone else.
To understand, and then
there you are in the heart of a former volcanic mountain, and that's exactly why you're on the show, Harlan, because you're the only one who can bring this kind of hands-on experience and talk about the disorientation, because it's not like one level, it's like several levels. They bend left and right. What happens to you down there?
It's endless. It's like Suribachi was like a red anthill. There was just tunnels going every which direction inside Suribachi, which were also connected with those tunnels outside, up the bot underneath Moriyama number 1, Moriyama number 2, and to the command caves. They go on and on and on. You have to be really careful when in these tunnels because of that fact that you never know where they're going to go. You can never go on your own. Only once, that's the first time I went. I was with my buddy and we separated foolishly. And I could, we went on for however many, yards we did. And now it's just like, this is not a good idea, because we'll never see each other again, the light of day or anybody else. I could hear him through the loose dirt, Harlan, where are you? We could go on. That's when it really came to hit home that the tunnels are endless. The tunnels are endless.
Well, in this particular sequence here, and maybe I could even ask your permission to upload the episode and put it on my YouTube channel. We'll see about permissions. But your sense of relief exiting it in that show is obvious on your face. Yes, you've had a really good time down there because you've been Mr. Battle Rat going there for the cameras. But you coming out, it's like, shit, I'm glad I'm out of there. I'm glad I've done it. But I'm glad. Hello, sunshine. Hello, air. Hello, freedom. You can see it there.
This was just in the morning. This was just in that pass shot. This is something. This is space. So right there, that's just in the morning. That's before we climbed up Suribachi to find that crawl space to go in. We were there all day. When we came out, it was pitch black. About 7:30, 8 p.m. at night. The typhoon was then, coming. It was starting to rain heavily, and we had to, get back to some shelter and realize, we've had enough. We've explored inside of Suribachi, to our heart's content. Let's get the hell out. And a good thing, because of, what we discovered the next day. This is the second day.
And just folks, look at the terrain difference and look at the weather difference. You know, sweating your ass off a few hours earlier, and now it's jungle wet. You know, and it's cold. I can imagine it's cold there.
Marine Corporal was kind enough to loan me his rain gear, and I'm like soaked through, let alone of like drenched from the rain. This is East Boat Basin. So these are the cliffs on the far northern flank of the landing beaches. This is where like the seeds that they dropped after the war, it was like a sci-fi movie. They just took over to where like, holy shit, this is like the jungle or being on, Okinawa or Saipan now, and not, barren Iwo because of all the foliage that had grown up. This also made it difficult to spot any tunnel entrances, some of which we walked right up to and almost fell into because they're completely obscured, by the kunai grass and everything else.
And now we're at a bigger, artillery position now. So you've got, again, folks, you've got everything from sort of trenches down near the beach, although famously they had most of the defenses kind of inland a bit, but you have the kind of those rock, shell, cement, kind of almost improvised bunkers for the the Type 92s. Then you have this big stuff like that. So how many of these things have you personally kind of explored through, and are they all where? I'm interested to know, when you go there with your maps, are they where the maps say they are, or are things different? How easy it is to locate yourself on a map? Because Surabaya is pretty easy, big, high, lumpy thing there, but everywhere else, it must be difficult and disorienting.
Well, if you always taking a wartime map, usually an artillery grid map, and then your enemy situation report map. Knowing,
by the way, folks, Battle Maps US have an artillery US Marine map for sale on their website. Hint, hint, go and get it. Put it on your wall. It'll be good.
Okay. So you thank you, Paul. So, using these maps as your aid, you basically just have to venture off in the area because they're not exact. And especially with all that foliage growing around them, it's fairly disorienting. It's not, but okay, we're going to head in this area and we will run into them, which we did. We then, if you also go to, I'm inside now one of the heavy gun bunkers. Ramey has also shared with us a photograph of some Marines outside of one of these bunkers that'll give everybody a better idea of the size of that's a firing table, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll find that photo in a minute, but yeah.
That's a firing table that they had painted on the wall of the bunker, with ranges to the beaches, for the these are what 120 millimeter guns. There we found 5, if not 6 of these, all in a row, on behind the cliffs of the East Boat Basin. This one was in about I'd say almost the second to the last one of the 6 that we found, and probably one of the best in the most complete condition. Others, the roof had been blown off, and a ship's 16-inch shell had just obliterated it. But that was probably the best preserved one that we found. Behind that were tunnels for the crews to take cover during shelling, and also where they had their their ammunition stored, etc. But if you can pull up that photo that Ramey shared with us, people will see, that's one of the guns, and the size of
I'm trying to find it now. Keep talking, I'll find it.
All right. So it was, the East Boat Basin was really tough to explore because it was so overgrown. I mean, you never knew what you were going to find. Like example, this is where we found an underground hospital that we had no idea was there. I think we were the first people inside of this underground hospital since maybe the battle. There you go. So that's the outside of one of the bunkers that line the East Boat Basin. There were, by our count, 5 or 6 of these positions. I'm sure there were more. I have to go back and study the enemy's situation report map to tell you an exact number, but they were quite Those are big guns, and those are all firing down the flank of the landing beaches as well as the fleet. So anyway, but behind this bunker, we found an underground hospital, and also an underground storage depot. There's mine carts and fuel drums that line the passageways here of this tunnel. This one, like you can see, is partially rock, and also further down loose sandstone. And every 30 feet, you'll find like a little hand carved shelf where they could have placed a candle. Others would have like metal rungs on the ceilings to suspend lighting cables. This picture, that's inside the underground hospital. We found medical bottles, morphine ampules, medical trays, medical equipment inside this little medical triage center.
I think the technical word is a nook, or it might be a cranny.
It was almost like that scene from like Winnie the Pooh where we're gonna go have tea at Rabbit's place, but you've got to go through the little hole. And we went through the little hole and it was like, oh my gosh, it's an underground hospital. It was basically undisturbed, which I think for the 3-day trip, if you will, was the most amazing / interesting find that we came across. Was finding this underground medical triage center or hospital. If you will.
I mean, it's just I can't get away from just how alien this environment is, and how privileged you are to go there, and how privileged we are to hear what you're saying. And
there's all the like their version of morphine ampules, on a medicine tray, and the different bottles, and that's like, okay, we've had enough. Get out, fresh air. From here, that's walking down the Sergeant Major Mastriano and I. At this point, we're clearly farther up. This would actually be Blue Beach 1 and 2. Further south ahead of us is Yellow Beach 1 and 2, Red Beach 1 and 2, and then finally Green Beach, which is right against Mount Suribachi. The East Boat Basin would be directly behind us in that photo. Here we go. We're just outside Hill 362A, which for anyone that's studied the battle, this is about the midpoint. And Nishi Ridge, Hill 382, and 362A became such a problem for the Marines because now it's like pulling up in the parking lot of a shopping mall. But in this case, the shopping mall is a hill. And inside the hill are a series of 5 to 7 interconnected tunnel networks. The Marine Shermans tanks would basically pull up as close as they could to the hill and just try to pump shells into the entrances and the any of the firing embrasures. But yeah, a lot of them, as we discovered, the shells just went right into the ground and never went off. It's like, like firing into mud. They're still there. Those are actually, those are impact marks, of course. Right around the same area, we found there's a number of, live 75 millimeter shells fired by the M4 Shermans into the base of Hill 362A. Hill 632A is also important because that's where, to this day, that Sergeant Bill Janouse, the Marine Corps combat cameraman who took the color footage of the original flag raising, is entombed with 2 other Marines, having gone into the cave. And, there's a whole story attached to that. We won't get into it now. But, to this day, their remains are still there inside this hill network. I've always wanted to go to 362A to see it for myself. You read about it in almost any Iwo Jima book. It was like a midway point in the battle. Now that we're done with Suribachi, Suribachi's been secured, and the hill network was of 32A, Nishi Ridge and 362A were holding us up. That took weeks. I mean, days and days and days. And like, that's where a lot of our, like our flag raisers ended up, being killed in the battle for 362A.
To interject again, that's one of the things that I think is the misconception for a lot of people that aren't really Pacific Theater fans, is they think the flag raising is the end of the campaign. It is by no means end of the campaign. It's what the beginning, really. They're going to go the rest of the island. So as powerful as those images are, and as important as those images are, it's a little bit misleading about what happened over the next 27 days. It was 30 days, and I mean, so the flags go up on the 23rd. So that's what D plus 4. Yeah, D plus 4. It's a 36-day battle. I mean, at least for the 4th Marine Division, they leave the island on day 36. I think the 5th Division left a day or two before them, and then the 3rd Division and so forth. And then, of course, the Army Regimental Combat Team comes in to mop up for 2.5 weeks after the Marines have left. So Nishi Ridge, Hill 36, this is inside 362A. This passageway is anywhere from 3 to 4 feet tall. It's all loose sandstone. All that white is sulfur, which the fumes that it gives off are just overpowering. We were just, sweating like a chain gang in Cool Hand Luke when we were in these tunnels. But the time capsule like things that we came across inside 362A were just mind blowing. Right there, we just found an officer's quarters that was carved out of the loose sandstone. In there was a bed and a chair and a table that had been made from wooden ammo crates. Inside of this was also part of his uniform. Like he had a spare pair of breeches, in all this mess. We carefully took out all the pieces to study them. And it was like, wow, talk about, crude. But that's what they had to work with. And that was, this officer's quarters, if you will. Lining the floors of the passageways, grenade crates, personal items. It was just mind-blowing. All the while, it is incredibly hot inside here. We were like, we only because we were driven to remain there and experience it and see all we could see to remain inside. You can see like lining the floor is just all this debris. Once of course the bodies, the remains had been removed. And on that note, people want to know that the Japanese, I think it's Operation Cherry Blossom, which is the Japanese equivalent to our JPAC, which is the American, MIA search and recovery, group. So Cherry Blossom would send in teams to the tunnels to unearth them, because most of them were closed in an effort. They'll send them in proper breathing equipment and suits, if you will. I think you saw some of this in Letters from Iwo Jima. They had at the beginning.
So that's what Team Cherry Blossom do, and they'll go in to try to recover remains, and of course they take the ashes back to the soldier shrine in Tokyo, but and they leave everything else, all the what's ever left, the shoes, the equipment, the whatever is just piled up outside the caves or whatever. 362A. So you can't, that's one spot on the island that even when the tour group and Mr. Mooney will, let it tomorrow. But they really don't want you to go because it's almost impossible to get to. Our group were very naughty, if you will. We crossed the live flight line when F-18s from the 7th Carrier Group were doing touch and goes, ran across the live flight line to get to the other side, and then went through the sea of cactus, which the thorns from the cactus they were like mini spears that would impale us along the way for I don't know, a good couple of hours before we finally got to 362A. And then, okay, take 5. And now we're going to look for a way to get inside of 362A, which, many people have never been to. I like explorer friends that have, this has been their mission, but they, of course, took the long way around the runway when they had the time. We, of course, were on a tighter schedule and, had to cross a live flight line to get there. The Japanese air police were not too happy about that, but that's another story.
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, and we are kind of running out of time. I wonder whether you're going to want to share or not going to want to share your story about crawling out in your marine gear and bumping into a couple of people, because Martin Harley, one of our regular viewers and contributors, he's a patron. And by the way, folks, don't forget to consider becoming a patron of WW2 TV. He asked, have you had any funny stories in the tunnels?
Yeah,
and I think it's the closest we have to a funny story.
This is, my dad, 40-year military man. We've been posted, all over the world, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, Guam, name it, born in Tripoli, Libya, etc. You hear about the ugly Americans, and you never want to be an ugly American. Often when on these tour groups and visiting islands, it's always disappointing, when a fellow American is bashing the locals, whatever. You don't want to be an ugly American. Well, was an ugly American on Iwo by accident, I suppose, not intentionally. My 2002, my buddy and I were in Kurabayashi's headquarters cave. This is the far north of the island. The entrance is cement reinforced, much like Atlantic Wall style, with a little cupola that you have to slide down into, and then you go through a crawl space, and then it opens up, and it's Tom Sawyer time. It's a huge labyrinth of meeting rooms and then passageways. We've been in there exploring, and now it's time to go. Also consider that we are in head to toe World War II Marine Corps uniforms, complete with camouflage covers on our helmets. We're coming out. So I'm first out, up the spout, hands up on the cupola, and pull myself out. And there's 3 sets of feet in front of me, in front of my face. I look up, and there's Kurabayashi's son, grandson, and a Shinto priest who have come to, basically pray and, pay homage, honor, Kurabayashi. The eyes of hate that look down upon me. It's like, it's like finding a rat in your cupboard. This is the last image that they probably wanted to have that day of there's a bastard American, looking Marine coming up from their father's grandfather's tomb, if you will, because he somewhere in there, was killed. That's a whole other story. But this is unforgettable. The eyes of hate as we came out, then followed by my buddy right behind me. We were like, okay, we kind of giggled about it in a very naughty fashion, but that's probably about the funniest story I have of of
And it
Iwo.
is a good story, and it also is to kind of change the tone slightly. You know, people talking earlier with the chat's going on about the fact the visits there may end up changing.
Right.
Yeah, the fact remains it is a place where thousands of Japanese are still interred. They don't have individual graves. It is part of the Japanese homeland. It's part of the Tokyo borough. It all, you know, it's a very important place to them, like the Somme is for the British or Gallipoli is for the Australians and New Zealanders, and it's, you know,
Gettysburg.
and it's important for Marines as well. And that's the thing, is I hope that there will be a solution whereby the Japanese can visit it for the reasons they want to, but also Americans and other interested parties can visit it for the reasons they want to as well. But that whether that will happen or I don't know.
So we can all pay our respects. So, you know, grandchildren can pay the respects to their granddad or great-grand, whatever. That, you know, it would be a shame if it finally came down to that we couldn't return anymore.
And if you'd like to, Harlan, just to share, because at the end of Battle Rats, you do have your own personal bit there. I'll put the photos up and that's the difference between some people who are interested in history and people who have a personal connection. You know, my great uncle was on Sword Beach. Your family fought, and you had friends who fought. So tell us about what your visit to Mount Surabaya. Then what you were going to do.
Right. Well, okay. So you have to go back. So 2002, the first trip, most every one of us had a Marine veteran that we adopted. And for the course of the trip, we would look after that veteran, you know, get his wheelchair onto the plane, get him something to drink, get him something to eat, look after him all the way through the trip. Well, I befriended an Iwo corpsman.
Don't do it if you don't want to, Harlan, but you know.
Daniel B. Thomas. He's written about in Flags of Our Fathers as one of the Buttermilk twins. Danny and his young Marine buddy, Chick Corelli, who lied about his age to join the Marines. He was 15 when he came to the 4th Marine Division. When he was killed that day, February 19th, he was 16. So I befriended Danny, and Danny became like, you know, my Marine, my corpsman that I would look after for the rest of that trip. Danny and I made several trips back to the island, 2003, and then especially for the 60th. So by the 60th, 2005, you know, Danny's health is failing. He's had a series of heart attacks. You know, he was this proper, you know, Southwestern Texas gentleman and would never ask anything. But in the course of a conversation we had, is this, you know, Harlan, I would like to go back to Iwo one more time, but I am just not in good health. So 2 hours later, just told him, so, well, you are going back. I will take you back. I'll take you back if I have to carry you. Oh, you know, I don't want to be any trouble. And, you know, I'm in my chair now, meaning his wheelchair, but no, you're going to go back. He had to go back to make peace with the fact that his memory, D-Day, he was 19, Chick was 16. When they landed this day 75 years ago, Danny ran down the ramp of the Higgins boat. He's making his way inland. He turns around to look where's my buddy, Chick? And then he turns around and sees that Chick has been eviscerated, you know, from the waist. His torso is on the beach. His entrails are trailing behind him. Danny said, I fell to my knees and I vomited up my toenails. I took a few minutes to gather myself, and then I went into autopilot to do my corpsman's work. Weeks later, Danny is, you know, with the 23rd Marines. They're at the meat grinder. They're at the quarry. 2 Marines are out in the open. They're both been hit. Danny runs out in the open to get them. Danny is then hit, wounded, but he continues because that's his job. He's a corpsman and he's there to look after the Marines. He gets to both the Marines. He patches them both up. They're then, you know, recovered by the other Marines that were offering covering fire. At that point, Danny blacks out and doesn't remember the rest of the battle. Danny got the Bronze Star for that. Fast forward to 2002 when I met him, he was forever scarred because of seeing his best friend, young chick, cut in half. So every trip that we made after that, we would go down to that section of Yellow Beach 2, and Danny would just sit and say, "Oh, I'm all right now, Hog." He used to call me Hog because, I don't like to shave, and I look like the bristles from a hog. "Oh, I'm all right, Hog. I'll be all right. You go on your way, and I'll be okay." Right? And he would sit down at the same spot of the beach that he landed at, and where he remembers Chick, and he would just spend the whole day, thinking about remembering that moment. Fast forward to the 60th, our last trip. Again, we took him down to the beach. He stayed there all day, but he finally told me, he says, "You know what, Hog, I had a good time today because I was able to say goodbye to my demons." And, that he could finally make peace with Chick, apologizing, "I'm sorry that I survived. I'm sorry you were killed. And it's been guilting me for all of his adult life." Months later, Danny succumbed to a series of heart attacks and died. By whatever chance, I had the occasion to speak to him 2 weeks before that. Hey, buddy, hey, Doc, as I would call me. "Hey, Merry Christmas. How you doing?" And he was basically was telling, "Well, Hog, I'm not doing too good. I've had, he's going on." It's like, "All right, Danny, well, listen, have you thought about, if your time is soon, what do you want? What do you want done?" Meaning, what do you want done? Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? "Well, yeah," he said basically that he wanted to be cremated and his ashes spread in Irving, Texas. And I said, "Well, the hell with that." I said, "I'm going to take you back. You want to be back. You want to be back with Chick, and I want to take you. By hook or crook, I will find a way." And he said, "Well, I would like that, Hog. I would like that very much." God bless Kearney Glenn, who, however, made contact with me and asked me to lead him on a personal battlefield tour of the island. Thank you, God. Thank you, angels above. Now I have a way to get Danny back to the island. 2007, smuggle Danny's ashes in an urn through customs at Guam. Please do not let them. I don't have a permit to transport human remains, but I got to do this. I got through. We got to the island. I had Danny's original HBT jacket with his Corman chevron stencil on the side and his name across the back and his helmet cover on and his leggings, all of which he had kept up in his attic in his house in Irving. I wore those that day as a tribute to him. I took him out to that little spot on Yellow Beach 2, and I spread his ashes. And I read over the 23rd Psalm, his favorite passage, and it was all good. Nat Geo had happened to be there that day, and they asked, "Can we film you?" And I thought about it, and I thought, yes, because I think Danny might like that to bring to light, because Danny was very involved with veterans, dealing with PTSD, and that. And so, okay, great. You can film us. So the pictures that you have there are of a Sergeant Leon Padell.
Yeah,
he was with the 24th Marines. Leon Padell was actually in the hospital with his son, and he saw the episode on Nat Geo. And at the end of the program, he said, here's reasons why people return to Iwo Jima. And then they cut to me, and I was spreading Danny's ashes on the beach. Well, Sergeant Padell says to his son, "I want that. I want that." Thus, Padell's son contacts me. My father saw you on Nat Geo the other night, and his last request is, if there's ever a way, could you please return his ashes to Iwo Jima like you did for the corpsman? I said, yes, absolutely. It would be an honor. However, my next trip comes to be, I will do it. So they purposely saved some ashes of their father. And lo and behold, then comes the opportunity via military channel to go and do a program on Iwo, 2009. And I take with me Sergeant Padell's ashes, a picture, his veteran's ball cap. I carry them in my Unit 3 bag. So I said, okay, well, to the son, where do you want me to place your dad? Well, my dad never made it up to Mount Suribachi. Well, yeah, because Mount Suribachi is the best seat in the house. From there, you can see the whole island. So, great. I will take your dad to the top of Suribachi, I'll put him in the best vantage point that I could find, which is ended up being right by the flagpole. And there you go. So at the end of the day, we climbed up Suribachi. All the while, when you see me going up, inside my bag is Sergeant Padell's remains. And I took him up to the top, spread the ashes, read over the verse that he had selected. And there you go. And left the cap and the pictures there, which everyone has been very respectful of. There was another Marine, Tiny Rediger, and there was a small porcelain statue of a Marine that Tiny's daughter, please, take this up for my dad. And I did. And we left that in a little plaque at the 5th Marine Division Monument. Years later, that plaque and statue were still there because everybody, American, Japanese, whoever, were respectful of that. Clearly, this was done to honor, a Marine, a serviceman who had been there. And anyway, so.
Well, I mean,
it's because this island means so much to those men. This is really, yeah. Exactly.
And that's why about doing this program, it's about getting the balance right. We wanted to know about the island, the terrain, and the sand, and the rocks, and the tunnels. But we are doing it on the 75th anniversary. It is important to talk about why we do it. We talked about it at length last night when we were getting ready for this, that you and I, we've known each other a long time. We're of like minds. We like talking about the history, but we also want to honor the guys who were there on both sides, tell their stories, and you can be analytical on 1 minute, and then the next minute it's about paying respect to people who lost their lives and fought for our privileges. So, well, given that I've got another show starting in 40 minutes, no, it was extra. People have loved this one, Harlan, and I can tell I'm going to get requests to have you come back on, and we'll do Peleliu or something. Or so yeah. In terms of those watching, we have got another show in 40 minutes time. Brian Mark Rigg is joining us to talk about. Well, we're talking about the fighting. We've done the big picture. We've done the terrain. Then we'll talk about the fighting. And I could have asked Harlan to do that as well because Harlan knows his stuff, and I will ask him to go back again. And for those watching, it's been a privilege to bring you this stuff. Iwo Jima Week is special, I think, because it's an iconic battle. We've brought some of the world's best historians and experts to you. And so, Harlan, thank you very much. That has been incredibly enlightening about what you can find on the island.
This flag.
We should mention the flag, shouldn't we?
Yes, the flag is all signed by Iwo Jima Marines, whom I've met during the various pilgrimages and trips. Everyone on Iwo would carry around that flag each trip. Sign this, please. That's going back with the vet. There's nothing like it. Like for the 60th, there were 3 747s of veterans and their families. Incredible. But yeah, it's all about, sitting with them, talking with them, learning their story and, giving them some props to where, that way they know, somebody younger gives a shit about me.
And it goes back to that
what
thing
I
about
did on a forgotten.
You have crawled through that stuff. You have got stuck in the sand. You have been stabbed by cacti. You have seen spiders that, given that you're not a very large gentleman, they could take you away and make you their mate. So you've been there and you've done it. And that's the thing. When you're looking at a veteran eye to eye, It's that trying to get a sense of what the shit they've been through and what the hell they've endured, and not just go, well, your commanding officer should have done a left turn there, not a right. You know, that's for classroom study. Anyway, boom, we're going to end it now because I've got things. So Harlan, thanks very much for those watching.
Thank you.
We'll be back again in 40 minutes. So don't forget all the books and things and links to the battle maps, links to the RZM.
And Ramey, who was like, Harlan, you didn't mention the book. Not a shameless plug, but Ramey of RZM Publishing and I have been working on a pictorial study, not of the battle, but of the men, of the Marines on Iwo Jima. It'll be a large format like the Arnhem book that we did a few years ago. But the importance and the focus of this book is we've identified many of the Marines in the photographs. And in the captions, we tell you what's happening to them at that moment. Did they survive the battle? And what became of them after the war? So we're working on that with the Marines on Iwo Jima. And thank you. I'm sorry.
Well, when it's ready, we'll bring you back on, Remy, as well. We'll talk about it and we'll do a promo. But right now, I'm going to go and get ready for the next show because
mate.
I'm going to have a drink. So thanks, Harlan. Thanks for watching. I'm going to end the stream now, everybody, and I'll see you in a little while. So cool. Thanks very much. Cheers.